Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy here to tell you about this. Kind of an old lens actually at this point. This is the Sony 14mm G Master F1.4 lens. It's been out for a few years and it's taken me a while to get around to it. So we shot some samples on this thing and we're going to talk a little bit about it. But before I do that, just want to really show you how tiny this lens is. If anyone's seen a Sigma 14mm lens, like the 1.8 or the new 1.4, this is going to seem svelte by comparison. So really well built, as you would expect from a G Master lens. We've got a nice smooth focus ring. We've got a physical aperture ring, a clicky aperture ring. You can declick it if you want, if you're going to be doing double duty video, that type of thing. Of course, the AF/MF switch set to MF most of the time on my camera, and we do have one custom button here if you need it. Of course, for Astro, set it and forget it, right? So this is an interesting lens. I've used it a lot, and I'm interested to show you some samples. So let's dive right into that. Hello, folks, and welcome to Lightroom, wherein I review a very old lens, I guess, kind of at this point. So here we've got a bunch of samples shot with the Sony FE 14mm f1.8 G Master lens. And we have two sets of samples here. One set of samples is taken with the Alpha 1, one set of samples is taken with the A7R Mark V. The samples that are taken with the R Mark V are tracked, and the ones that are taken with the 50 megapixel Alpha 1 are stationary on a tripod. The reason that I do this, well, we torture test the lens when we track it with the highest megapixel sensor available, and it's still a bit of a torture test actually to test with the Alpha 1 on a tripod, but you know what? I'm here to show you the ugly that the lens has, not to give you the best case scenario. If you haven't watched one of these somewhat nerdy reviews before, here's my methodology. The untracked photos here are 15-second exposures. That's just what I need to keep the stars from trailing with this sensor. And this gives you a bit of an idea about what type of time you'd actually be able to take your exposures for out in the field. The tracked exposures are taken at 60 seconds because, essentially it doesn't really matter. So we want to get a nice good exposure there, nice clean exposure. Please keep in mind though, we are looking at optical properties of the lenses. We're not actually looking at the ISO, noise, etc. of the sensors themselves. So do keep that in mind. When it comes to the two cameras, you'll see I'm using different ISOs, speaking of which. So this is due to ISO invariance. These cameras both have essentially two analog amplifiers in them, and these amplifiers represent the only true ISO values, or the only true analog amplification stages. And this is where you'll get your noise from. ISO 320 on the 7R Mark V, ISO 500 on the Alpha 1. These are the second stage amplifiers. If you're not familiar with ISO invariance, basically every ISO above these values is linear. So what the camera is effectively doing is it's just bumping up the exposure. If we came here and we just hit the exposure button a couple of times, that's all the camera's doing. That can be good, but if I shot at ISO 2000 or whatnot, I wouldn't really get any different results if I came in Lightroom, besides maybe blowing out some of the stars and the highlights. So I use usually the second base ISO just to give myself the most latitude theoretically. Not that the stars aren't going to blow themselves out anyway. All right, so that's a little bit too much in the weeds. So we've got a few pictures here to go over, a few samples untracked, some tracked samples, and then I have a few samples where we've put the corners to the test. I've put the brightest star I could. These are taken in July, middle of July. I think it must be Vega, if I remember correctly, but we'll take a look. So first things first, let's go dive in here and we will take a look at the untracked photos. Coming right up into the center here, you can see minimal star trailing, and that's because we've restricted ourselves to that 15-second limit there. And things look pretty good overall. This is at F1.8. I think if we come up here, yeah, we're not seeing, there's like a little loss of contrast around the brighter points, but overall not too bad. If we look into the corners, we are seeing a bit of astigmatism start. We'll get into that here. Some funny shapes. You'll notice in the left-hand corner here and then the right-hand corner, they're pointed different directions. Here it's kind of pointed down to the right. Here it's kind of pointed, you know, either down to the left or up to the right, however you want to think about it. I don't see too much in the way of chromatic aberration or any spherical aberrations. Do have a bit of astigmatism. It's, you know, really tough to diagnose coma at this particular focal length and type of exposure here. We can at least say that it doesn't have bad coma. So I think that's actually pretty good for F1.8, but you be the judge. I'm not here to tell you if the lens is right for you. I'm just here to show you the lens. So this is 1.8, f2, 2.2, 2.5, 2.8. I should mention that I've boosted by 2 stops the exposure, just to give myself something to actually show you. If I had left it as it came out of camera, there wouldn't really be anything there. It's pretty dark. In this case, you know, 2.8 is probably too dark. And to be fair, you don't buy a 1.8 lens to shoot at 2.8, right? So that gives you an idea of its untracked potential. Now I have these ordered a little weird because I had to retake one here, so I apologize. These are the tracked photos. This is f1.8. And as you can see here, we've actually got nice round stars. The tracking did its job. And of course, that means that we're not experiencing any weird aberrations in the center of the frame. If you pay attention to the little preview in the navigator up in the top left-hand corner, you can also see there is some vignetting, pretty strong vignetting at 1.8. And that's to be expected if you've seen this lens, held this lens. It's quite small, and that tiny front element relative to other lenses such as the Sigma 14mm f1.4 or the old Sigma 1.8. At any rate, that front element's tiny, and when you design a lens like that, you're typically giving a trade-off of that vignetting. But overall here, I don't see much in the way of fringing or chromatic aberration, spherical distortions. Yeah, the brighter stars, we're not getting that kind of bloat that you can get. I mean, it's not a spherical lens, so that makes sense. Let's go over here to the corners. All right, we got fighter jets. So this is the part where we all learn some new words, or maybe a few of us learn some new words. This is not coma. What we're seeing here actually is 2 different types of astigmatism. And an astigmatism, if you're not aware, it's essentially the lens having trouble focusing all the light from the point source, which is a star, into one point, and it gets stretched out in 2 different axes. So we have tangential astigmatism, which goes from the outside to the center. So basically it's radial. And then we have sagittal astigmatism, which makes, in this case, the wings of the fighter jet. And that kind of rings the frame. And you'll find that if we move around, and I'll just speed this up, you can see here we're not experiencing as bad towards the top edge here. Keep in mind though that, you know, these fighter jets here, if it was rotated, they'd be out of the frame. So let's just jump to the other side. Here we can see the fighter jets, little different shaped, which isn't, honestly, it's not too out of the ordinary, but they do kind of seem like they're pointing down to the right. You'll notice we're in the top left-hand corner now, so that is to be expected. You're getting your tangential astigmatism radiating out towards the edges, and the sagittal astigmatism sort of ringing that. We'll check the bottom left-hand corner here. Ooh, we got an especially bright star here. Now, this isn't actually that bad for this type of lens. I'm going to be perfectly blunt. It's really hard to design a lens like this. You're not going to find a lens on the market that has round stars this far out to the edges at f1.8 at 14 millimeters on a full frame sensor. You're just not. We don't have magic engineering yet, but overall, pretty consistent. Not actually that bad. We'll go kind of, say, a quarter, third of the way in. Here, still got a little Pac-Man Go shapes pointed towards the center there, but nothing really that unusual. And of course in the center, we're doing pretty good. We've got, yeah, a little bit of tangential. So, you know what? Better than average, frankly. Now, here, there's a little bit of fringing here and possibly a little external coma. I'll teach you another word you may or may not know. So internal coma has that little comet tail that points in towards the center of the frame. External coma has a little comet tail pointing outwards. And it's same as a tangential astigmatism as far as being radial. It will radiate outwards or towards the center of the frame. That's if the coma is part and parcel with the design of the lens. Now, if you have coma that appears to point in one direction across the entire frame, like from edge to edge, more or less, basically in a single direction, you might actually be experiencing either a tilt in one of the lens elements in your lens, or maybe some decentering or something. It might actually be a production fault or a misalignment. So not promising anything, but if you ever do experience that, that is a possibility. It could also be the case with older lenses or cheaper lenses that could actually just be part and parcel with the design of the lens or the production of the elements. But I have seen in some cases, if there is something out of alignment, you can get aberrations that are unidirectional, more or less. In this case, though, with reference to coma, I just don't really think there is any. This over here, where there's like a little bit of maybe fuzziness, I think that's more actually just astigmatism and just a funny shape. But I will note we are at 400%. So we're zoomed in really, really, really far. It's just not realistic to how your photos are ever going to be seen, at least not how they should be seen. There's no artistic merit in pixel peeping like this. Question is, how good is the Sony for distortion and some other corrections such as vignetting corrections here? Well, we've got our shot here at 1.8. We're going to come and enable profile corrections. And you can see, if you watch the frame as it shifts, you know what? It's actually not too bad. There's a bit of barrel distortion in the middle, which flattens out, but not really too much. And then as that's, if you want to imagine, kind of pushed away from us, the corners are pulled towards us a little bit, flattened out. And let's see, watch on the left-hand side here. You can watch these stars. And, you know, we're losing just a smidge, just a smidgy. Overall, not too bad. We're not losing a ton of focal length. And vertically, or I mean, I guess it's on the short edge here, the height of the image, we don't seem to actually be losing much. It's kind of keeping this ring around here kind of in the same spot. If you look here down at this star, it's right at the edge of the frame and it's not going anywhere. So this center area is getting kind of flattened down to a frame of reference around here. And then the edges are kind of getting, if you want to imagine, pulled forward. Pretty good, actually, all things considered. The vignetting, and it helps if you look here in the preview navigator, the vignetting itself doesn't completely disappear with the corrections. And here in the corner, we're getting, you know, there's not a lot going on. Here we've got, you know, we're closer to the Milky Way, so there's more stars. You're getting more light. Even though you can't tell, you're getting more total light through the exposure here. We're getting into fairly distant areas here from the Milky Way, so they're a little bit darker because there's just not as many stars to create background illumination, and this is dominated by noise, and there's very little exposure there, I believe. You can come over here into the manual corrections and you can try and flatten it out a little bit. Again, paying attention to the navigator there to help guide you. Vignetting isn't necessarily a bad thing. It does help give some subtle framing to your images as well, but if you don't like it, you can come in here and mess about. And this is the type of thing where you can do it once and then sync it to a whole range of images. Or, you know, if you know that your lens needs a little, you know, plus 33 vignetting, if you know that, you can always just put that value in to help offset the profile. But yeah, overall, didn't lose a lot of focal length there when we corrected for the distortion, so pretty pleased. That being said, that is the performance at f1.8. Next, we have f2. So here we have the center, f2.2, 2.5, 2.8. You'll notice if we go back in the other direction, the vignetting here actually is still quite strong. 2.8, 2.5, 2.2, f2, f1.8. If we go into the corners, here we can see how the astigmatism acts as we stop down. f1.8, f2, 2.2, 2.5, 2.8. So you see here by 2.8, we're darkening down enough that the stars are sort of coming back towards a blobby shape. The wings are kind of getting clipped. That being said, you don't buy a f1.8 lens to shoot at f2.8. So let's go take a little peek just at a different corner here. Here we have 2.8, 2.5, 2.2, f2, and 1.8. And here the astigmatism is alive and well, but as I mentioned, we are at 400%, and this is pretty good. Like, you're not really going to find much cleaner than that. I've had a lot of lenses pass through my hands, and, you know, I keep trying to find something that's magic, but, you know, this one's pretty good, especially for the compact package. That being said, whether or not this is good enough for performance. For you personally is completely up to you. It's not my job to tell you what you need and what you can find acceptable. I'm just here to show you what the lens does. So here we have the corner torture tests. Now I will mention that these are actually focused in the corner. In the previous samples, we're focused in the center so that we get round stars in the center. Here we're focused in the corners. So the center is actually going to be a little out of focus. But let's take a look here at the corner. This is F1.8, F2, F2.2, F2.5, and F2.8. And you see here on the brightest stars in the extreme corner of the frame at 400%, you know, we still have some of that astigmatism. The brighter the star, the more you're going to notice this issue. You see these dimmer stars here. They're not round, but they're rounder than their compatriot here. And if we go back to 1.8, see they start to change shape a little bit. But as I said, keep in mind this is in the extreme corner. This is focused on the corner itself so that you're getting the crispest view of that astigmatism. And you can see here, other portions here are a bit out of focus, whereas the corner is in focus. And here in the center of the frame, you see things are a little bit out of focus as well. This does bring up something that might be useful to you, especially if you have a lens like this where there is, you know, a bit of a difference as you go from center to edge. You might try actually focusing here, sort of halfway out to the corner. Your mileage may vary depending on the lens. This could just give you kind of a bad time the whole way. It might give you an acceptable compromise. Here, you know, things are starting to get a little bit wonky, so I might actually suggest focusing in the center in the case of this lens, but you know what? Give it a try and, you know, see what your results are like. These will be available for download. Check the description for a link. They will be full RAWs, so, you know, download them, pixel peep, do some processing, you know, throw a lens profile on there. That being said, please download these, see if this is the lens for you. I would ask though, please don't post them online. Please don't use them for any purpose other than assessing the lens. Please don't misrepresent them as your own. While these aren't going to win an award, they are my copyrighted works, and I appreciate your cooperation in that. Well, what do you think? Is this the lens for you? Did you find those samples interesting? I really hope that you did. And yeah, to be honest, this lens is really, really good. I don't usually like to actually share an opinion when I do these types of reviews. I more or less like to let the buyer make their own decisions, but this lens is staying in my personal kit, even though it's got some company. So that's high praise, at least for me. So I hope you found this review useful, and maybe we'll see you in the next one. Take care.